challenge, but we're all back. We cannot wait to actually be here back with the spotlight session. I've got a wonderful Matthew Kokkonen here with us, and he's going to be our spotlight session panelist. And we're going to talk about on how to prioritize projects when everyone is critical. And then I've got two more panelists, two more wonderful people coming to joining us for the panel discussion. So right now I'm going to give a word to Matthew, who is the Senior Director of R&D Operations for Cloro Biopharma. And if you've got any questions whatsoever, please keep them coming in the comment section on your right-hand side. And then, yeah, actually, everyone, this is Matthew, and I'm going to give you my word. So thank you so much and welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about this and hopefully elicit a reaction from folks. Just before I begin, anything that I'm providing today are certainly my own experience and observations. They don't reflect any position or perspective that Clover has. I'm going to just begin before we have a couple of our other panelists join, just to introduce and hopefully plant some seeds and elicit a reaction. So I'm going to try and share my screen here. Katie, can you just confirm that you see my screen?
Of course, not so far. So if the screen doesn't appear, you need to play it.
Okay.
Not so far.
All right. How about now? There we go.
Yes, all perfect. All spotlight. You're all set.
All right, great. So I just want to take a few minutes to kind of introduce our topic today. And as Katie mentioned, this is around multivariate prioritization. What I wanted to really explore today is, a few key points. Our organizations often want a consistent approach, often a quantitative prioritization score around their project portfolios. But what I found in practice is that can be, as you probably all have as well, very challenging. And so what I wanted to propose today is exploring the use of multivariant methods to really align your stakeholders around that portfolio. And so we'll talk a little bit about how we weigh different variables, who decides, how things change over time, and particularly how we can tie these things to strategy. But I just want to, again, frame kind of the environment that we're working in. A lot of our stakeholders come from very different expectations. And that expectation comes from where they sit in the organization, maybe their historic practices around prioritization. I know in a previous company, there were some real significant differences between the various geographies. Not to mention the world is dynamic. Today's prioritization algorithm may have no place in tomorrow's. And we can see what COVID has done to a lot of companies as a case in point to this. I will say that I've been a part of hours, if not days and weeks, of workshops to try and develop, consistent, aligned variables that have specific scores, that are specifically weighted, that are then applied to hundreds of projects. And what I found is oftentimes we see a diminishing return in what's ultimately produced because of those first couple factors. And what ultimately, is the consequence of all of that is that the stakeholder buy-in doesn't last. And what we find is, within a couple months, we start seeing people working on different items or challenging the initial portfolio, or real world events, force a project to come into a portfolio that really bumps a bunch of the priorities that had previously been discussed. So what is the difference between, using an algorithm and employing more of a multivariate approach? So as we've discussed, using an algorithm to get kind of a quantitative prioritization really assesses key variables that are often weighted. The goal is to avoid bias, right? Let's get consistent definitions applied consistently to these projects, and now our stakeholders' pet projects or functional aspirations aren't going to be disproportionately represented versus, say, our more quiet stakeholders. Ultimately, you've got a list of projects that are sorted from highest score to lowest score. And again, I want to be very clear that I'm simplifying this for the sake of the introduction. But in the same vein of simplicity, I'll highlight that multivariate analysis really focuses on specific themes and values. What's most important is the discussion, and it embraces the fact that there are certain pet projects that are going to inherently be above the waterline. We all know from experience, if you've tried to apply an algorithm, that there are true strategic projects that for whatever reason get disproportionately scored quite low, and conversely, projects that we know we shouldn't prioritize that seem to get scored really high. And instead of trying to fight the algorithm or tune the algorithm to be what we think it should be, why not just embrace through an aligned conversation what we really think it should be? Now, the key to this is making sure that there is ultimately agreement to a baseline, and that this isn't completely blown up every time someone has a differing opinion or there's a challenge to the portfolio. So I wanted to highlight a few key success factors when thinking about applying a multivariant approach. So first of all, do your homework. One of the things that is consistent with employing an algorithm is making sure that you really understand the portfolio and the different stakeholders and the strategy and all of these other factors. And with that homework being done, we can go into this with a clear understanding of the methodology. We want to really be clear with our stakeholders in terms of how this baseline will be managed and changed, be very clear in terms of how we're going to report, and make sure we follow up on that plan so that we can monitor the aligned plan as it's put into motion. And finally, we want to make sure that we're having bi-directional communication from corporate strategy in the portfolio, so that the real world experience of the portfolio is helping inform and provide data to the corporate strategy, and vice versa. There is alignment with the strategic direction of the company. So that's a very quick highlight to get us started. I'm hoping to invite now some of our other panelists to start the rest of the conversation.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Matthew. And I'm actually seeing you all here. I can see Fabio. Hello, hello. I can see Brooke as well joining us. It's a pleasure. Thank you all so much for making this all happen, and wonderful. It was a great start to the panel session with Matthew's spotlight spotlight session. And I would just like to say who we're speaking to. So Fabio De Martino, welcome. Fabio is the Associate Director from BioMarin Pharmaceuticals, and we've got a moderator of the panel discussion of the session, Brooke D'Apolita. Hello, welcome. Hello. And she is the director she's actually the regulatory project management from Arthrosis. So we've got three wonderful speakers, experts, professionals, and I'm just gonna go away now and give you the space to discuss. So thank you, and I'm giving you the word.
Great, thank you, Katie. And welcome, Fabio, and great job, Matthew, on your presentation. And let's follow it up with some panel discussion to follow up on your presentation. So if an organization wants a consistent approach and or a numeric prioritization score. How do these multivariate methods work or not work with this expectation? Kind of following up on some of the discussion you had in your presentation, Matthew.
Yeah, so I think the important thing to point out is that multivariate methodology is still defined and communicated, right? I think sometimes people feel like if you don't put in an algorithm in place and stick to this quantitative scoring methodology, that you're trading structure and focus and consistency with just chaos and whim. And so I think it's really important that the stakeholders are very clear, what are the variables at play, and that there's clear documentation and preparation not only for, but also post, to kind of set into motion a paradigm that's going to certainly evolve with the business needs and the organizational evolution, but it shouldn't be reinvented every time. And with that, then, we've got clearly defined variables that we're able to assess and discuss.
Great, thank you. And Fabio, anything to add to that?
Absolutely, and I will add, communication is definitely one of the key aspects. You will always have to deal with the stakeholders because, the multivariate prioritization, we try to give some mathematical or logical structure to how we prioritize project, but then, and I'm sure that you have all had this experience of dealing with stakeholder, that it's much more for them be able to communicate and assuring them and taking care of their needs than showing, a fantastic spreadsheet all organized. So they will rely on you. So definitely, as Matt was mentioning in his slides, stakeholder management and communication will be key, on top of setting the right weight for each parameter that you are using for prioritizing projects.
Definitely. Stakeholder management seems like a common theme, for both, quantitative and qualitative analysis and in any, PPM setting in any organization. So whether, analytically prioritizing projects or, setting up your kickoff meetings, you just always need that stakeholder engagement. So thanks for raising that. And how does your organization weigh these different variables when you're working with these multivariate methods? So is that more analytical and quantitative, or is that more qualitative? Apologies.
Fabio, go ahead. Lead this one.
Sounds good. Perfect. Yes, we'll. And I apologize if you hear some noise in the background. So we'll start usually qualitative analysis because it gives the opportunity to make sort of quick prioritization of the multitude of ideas or project that we get potentially in the intake, and then from there we still have quite amount of project that then we evaluate with more quantitative analysis. So, and connecting with the previous mention of the multivariate analysis that we are doing is ensuring that all the stakeholders agree on the different parameters that we are using. And it depends on the maturity of the company. And if you are a startup, you are an established company, you are in which stage you are, how many people, because definitely for a startup that does not have product on the market, you will have as a weight more getting something on the market fast compared to a more established company where maybe you are more in tune on the other aspect of the compliance, right of operate, and things like that. So definitely starting with qualitative analysis and then doing the quantitative analysis later.
Very interesting that it has both parts of that. And Matthew, how about at your company?
Yeah, in my experience, it follows very much what Fabio shared. I think the key is to is to make sure that it's tailored. If you're working within a single function, the likelihood that your projects are much more similar and much more easily compared could lend to a very different approach than when you're working across, say, a cross-functional capital portfolio that's global in nature. There could be a lot of different variables at play, and you're not necessarily comparing apples to apples in terms of your projects. Thus, going for a more quantitative assessment is sometimes challenging. I would assume there are some folks watching that are like, well, we use NPV and all of these other tools in our toolkit to establish that algorithm-driven prioritization. And I would say that what we're proposing with multivariate could absolutely employ a lot of those same techniques, but depending on the portfolio, you may first begin with one of the criteria that Fabio mentioned, which is this is a regulatory commitment to the FDA or EMA or some other body. I don't really care about the NPV or the score or the cost or anything like that. I'm not going to be able to produce drug products unless I do this project, right? So that's going to go right up to the top of the list. We may know that there is a strategic project that, again, we're making for strategic purposes that may not have great numbers associated with it at this time based off of what we know, but we know it's a direction that our executive team wants to take. Boom, that's at the top of the list. Now, as we start working our way through some of these key variables and discussing and aligning those priorities, we may then go right into a conversation around sorting these projects based off of NPV or cost or some sort of composite score or risk profile. These kinds of things could very easily be quantified and may be able to provide us some level of fidelity in terms of what we can do above our waterline. That waterline could be driven by budget or by human resource constraints.
Yep, makes sense. And I just want to turn to some of the audience questions. We really appreciate the engagement. And Matt, you were just talking about sorting. So someone just had a clarification question. When you're saying an algorithm, are you meaning a sorting algorithm? Is that the specific algorithm you're speaking of? Or so just some clarity around the sorting and the algorithm terms.
Yeah. Just to give kind of a very quick example, at my previous company, we worked on prioritizing a site's capital investment within the manufacturing space. And we worked with an outside consultancy to develop an algorithm based off of a healthy number of different variables. Each of those variables, depending on the value, high, medium, or low, or very high, had its own score, and each of those variables was weighted, and it produced a composite score that then was, intentioned to provide us a list of our top, X number of projects. We draw the waterline in terms of what we can afford and resource, and voila, there we are. So that's what I'm talking about in more or less a pure algorithm-driven approach.
Great, thank you for answering that, Matthew. Another question, this I find interesting, regarding pet projects. How do your teams harbor an unbiased environment and take out the emotion of selecting those projects that some teams may be emotionally invested in? Thank you, Eric, for that question. How about we start with Fabio, because this kind of makes me think of that stakeholder management, discussion that you brought up, especially when it comes to key stakeholders. Are there certain, factors that weigh in, and how do you kind of take out that bias perspective and that emotion and, that project that somebody's held on to for all of these years?
That's definitely, something that we all experience those, and I continually see those type of pet projects. And what I've been doing in the past is working with the leadership team, working to from the beginning of the year, maybe a strategic goal for the 1, 2, 3, 5 years, and then from there connecting all the projects that are happening in the group or the function or the organization to that vision or goal that has been set by the CEO or the CTO or whoever is in charge over there. But continually see pet project, because sometimes, as Matt was mentioning, maybe the company has enough resources or budget to do those. So I would say, if there is budget or resources, definitely, sometimes pet project can become something very interesting for a company, may become the next product on the market, and you know that. The toughest part is when you are not above the line, right? When you don't have the luxury of having resources and a budget. So, and that may be the norm. In that case, usually, trying to work. I'm putting my as a psychologist, I'm trying to work with the different stakeholders, detaching the project from the stakeholder, because sometimes when it's a pet project, oh, it's me. I'm reflecting myself in the project, and if the project doesn't get approved or completed, I'm failing. And I'm talking about stakeholder higher up. CTO or vice president and things like that. So it's an interesting dynamic. So one of the things that I do is working with them, detaching their image from the project. So when there will be the conversation and the prioritization and the sorting, they will not be emotional. I'm still learning. Some of them are tough cookies, to be honest with you. So I don't have the perfect recipe, but I'm interested to hear from you and Matt.
Yeah, Matthew, go ahead.
Yeah, I think to a certain extent, we know in practice that bias is unavoidable. So I think the best thing that I've tried to do over the more recent years is stop trying to fight the fact that there's bias and make sure that there's an open conversation around it, right? Depending again on where you're performing this portfolio management, that conversation may be shorter or different or longer, depending on where you sit. So I think it's really important, like I suggested in kind of the preamble to this, is to do your homework. Earlier in today, someone mentioned that the meeting is really before the meeting, right? And so in certain circumstances where folks have pet projects or specific concerns or are likely not gonna be aligned with what you think the recommendation probably is going to land with, meeting with those folks ahead of time can be instrumental. And then in the meeting, making sure it's clear the trade-off or consequence for going with the project. Because as Fabio mentioned, companies have been made and lost based off of these pet projects. A pet project isn't necessarily bad. And so we just need to go eyes wide open and aligned into it.
Great. Thank you both. And I think we have time for one last question. So Vladimir asked, which technique generates higher portfolio value, prioritization or optimization in a portfolio selection? He thinks optimization, and he's wondering what you both think. So Fabio, did you want to?
Yeah, as we were mentioning in the beginning, we do a qualitative analysis, and I love using post-it notes, even with executives when we are in a room, or when we were in a room. And one of the techniques that everybody gets, and it's very visual on a big wall, is the effort impact matrix, where you can see, right away what are the projects, high or low impact, high effort. That's a no-brainer that you will try to explore those one. So I'll start with this technique for polishing a little bit the conversation that will happen next with more data more parameters that Matthew were covering in his presentation.
Great, thank you. And just to round out the panel, Matthew, did you want to share your thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I think the portfolio that can offer value is one that can be delivered. So I think prioritization plays a role in it, especially if that exercise can get folks aligned. I think that exercise and that conversation is going to be really important to contributing to another key aspect, which is optimization. So I really see it as both are needed, and that's still kind of the first step. You still need a delivery organization who's going to be able to deliver that, and the right oversight and governance to make sure that it's delivered as expected, as needed by the business. So I would agree that optimization is important. I would say that it together has to be a package deal to really maximize the value.
Yep, there's just a quick clarification from Vladimir. He was asking about mathematical optimization, but since we're out of time for this panel, maybe Vladimir, you would like to connect with Matthew or Fabio offline to discuss that question in further detail. But thank you all for your time, and thank you, Matthew and Fabio, for walking us through that. That was very fascinating information, and thank you, Matthew, for your spotlight session.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm gonna finish up with saying thank you to all. Brooke, an amazing moderator. Thank you. Maybe consider a career with Y Summit. Matthew and Fabio, and yeah, really Brooke as well. You're very professional, and honestly, Fabio, I loved hearing the background sound because it reminds me that we're all human, and no matter how scientific and data-based this whole conference is, we really are human, and it's great to just be alive and be here and share life and share the passion that why you're here, all PPM oriented professionals. So thank you so much for joining, for accepting my invitation. And this is actually the roundup for the first half of our first day of this conference. We're gonna have 1 hour long lunch, so please freshen up, connect with PPM professionals on our PPM workout platform, get together, visit our network tool booth, our expo booth. There's so many things that you can do outside of your lunch. So please connect, and we're gonna be back in an hour with the biopharma case study from Tony Dibbitt. So another wonderful professional. I feel like I'm getting emotional just by introducing you to everyone because I can see how amazing value they're all bringing, and you're all bringing to the table and to the conference. So thank you all so much. We're gonna continue in an hour, and I'm so excited to see you here back online again with me and other wonderful people. So thank you, Brooke, Matthew, and Fabio for the session. Thank you all attendees for being here with us, and we're gonna see you very shortly. So get ready.